This one over here. Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for being here today. We are here at Lyft headquarters in sunny San Francisco. I'm with Mark Grover, who is a product manager here at Lyft, working on data projects. He is a founder of the open source data discovery platform Amundsen, which we'll be getting into today. He's also a co-author of the Hadoop Application Architectures book, which has sold over 10,000 copies worldwide, and he is a frequent committer and contributor to many open source projects in the big data space. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Greta.
All right, so let's start by just kind of setting the stage for the viewers. Can you just talk a little bit about the high level why Amundsen? Why is data discovery an issue at Lyft, and why did you feel the need to build a tool like Amundsen?
For sure. Lyft, as you know, has grown quite a lot over the last few years. Today we do over 50 million rides a month. And as Lyft has grown, the amount of data we store, the amount of data we process in order to serve those experiences for our riders and our drivers has also increased. This problem obviously is not unique to Lyft. It exists other places too, but talking about Lyft, as I said, like the data has grown. At the same time, the number of people in the company has grown. So smart, capable individuals are joining the company and they want to make change, drive decisions based on data, but they don't have the context. They don't understand the variety of information and data we have available in the organization. So those two problems, both the growth of data and the growth of the number of employees and people who want to use that data, has led to this unique problem where you don't know if this data exists. Has someone done this analysis or work before? That's the first problem. And the second one, if you find it, you need to figure out if it's still trustworthy, the right thing for you to use. And that led to this problem of data discovery and data trust, and which was the problem we embarked upon solving.
Yeah, okay, and so you mentioned kind of your data users. Let's talk a little about who are those people, and then also what had they been doing to find this information before?
Yeah, so there are various different categories of users. The first kind of user I would describe is what I call the analyst persona. And I don't want us to get distracted by the word analyst. The title can be anything. So the title can be analyst or data scientist, it could be an engineer, but this persona is somebody who's using fairly raw fundamental data sets to do analysis, right? This is the first category of users. The second category of users is the kind of user who's consuming the work that's being done by the analyst persona to make decisions. So this is a person who may use a dashboard or a machine learning model that was generated by the analyst persona to then employ decisions to drive the business forward. So the first kind of user, the analyst persona, is what we focused on in the first version, the MVP of Amundsen. And for them, our goal was very simple, to solve those two problems. The first one was help them find the data very easily in a very opinionated way, because we know what data is more trustworthy than the other. And second is expose a bunch of relevant information where possible and have a model for trust, so they know when they're accessing this data that this is trustworthy for them.
And how are they doing that in the past? Or did they just kind of...
Right, so previously they were actually going around and asking a bunch of people on Slack, which is the most hated way to do this. So you get interrupted, you get asked questions like, hey, is this the right table for me to use? Even if I understood the table, is this column the right column for me to use? Is it still getting populated? If you were a little more savvy, maybe you've been in the organization long enough, you could go to the tools like Airflow, which is our ETL tool, and try to figure out, is this table still being populated? Are there any issues with that? And you could go to the engineering team based on your relationship or knowledge of who the engineer was and ask, like, how does this instrumentation work? And so it was based mainly on tribal knowledge and maybe some skill set and the amount of time you had in the organization to figure out which tool or which person I need to ask.
Yeah, so that feels like a big problem that you need to solve. And I feel like a lot of our viewers out there probably have similar problems going on in their own organizations. So why did you guys decide to build Amundsen, and why was kind of what ultimately became Amundsen the right way to go about solving this? What was the thought process there?
So before I jump into the build versus buy versus adopt is a new criteria I add where you can adopt an open source project to do the same work. I want to share like what was our criteria for choosing a solution, right? So the choice we wanted to make was we wanted it to have trust embodied in the solution itself, so things that were more relevant, trustworthy to users showed up earlier in the search results, for example, than later on. Two, we wanted there to be very little manual curation. As the company is growing, we can't rely on a lot of manual intervention of metadata and curation to drive trust. We wanted to rely on as much as possible on automated factors to drive that. So those were two main criteria. The third one was a slight preference to it being open source. We believe in not being locked down. We want to be driving the open source community forward as well with us. So those were the three criteria. We looked at in the build, we looked at a bunch of different vendors, in the buy. In the build, we obviously had one option to build ourselves. In the adopt, we looked at open source projects like LinkedIn's Warehouse as well as Apache Atlas. Ultimately decided that the experience we wanted wasn't out there and there wasn't any open source project that we could rely on. We decided we wanted to build this ourselves and build it open source from the get-go. And that's what became Amundsen.
Yeah, and I feel like kind of metadata is this big sort of, I guess, answer to a question that you're trying to ask. And
absolutely. As this process began, we realized that we were gathering all this interesting metadata, which we wanted to use for data discovery and trust, but we realized that we could use it for other applications as well. So what we ended up building was a data discovery application on top, but at the bottom is this metadata engine, the core of all the information that people need to use to power the data discovery application. And then we'll talk about how we can use this metadata for other applications later on as well.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so you've built Amundsen, it's out in the world, it's out in the wild. How are those users now finding this data and how are they using this tool?
Yeah, so the way Amundsen works today, the first application is data discovery. So you go to Amundsen and you've got the main flow of the experience is a discovery or search experience. So you come in and you type. Let's say you were a new data scientist who joins the ETA team and you want to improve the ETAs that writers all across the country see. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to see where is the ETA's data set and if someone has done that analysis before. And so you type ETA in the search box, it's very lean, and you get a list of results. These results are powered in a way similar to PageRank, where you, like Google, these are rated based on how commonly a table is queried. So if a table is queried more often, you would find that up on the top of the search results. If it's queried less often, it's down at the bottom. It's also based on other factors, as in when was a table last populated, or who else is using that table within your team, so on and so forth. So we have the search experience. You click on the first, hopefully, result, which is super relevant to you. You go into the table detail page. Here you have information about the schema of the table, which is up to date. It has descriptions, which are fetched from the underlying source of the table, but then we have some additional metadata around this. So you have information around who owns this table, which is one of the very small pieces of information that's curated, so someone actually has to go and own the table. But then we have who frequently uses that table, because oftentimes those people can act as a good proxy for the owner of the table. We have a quick preview of the data if you have access to the data set. We have information about various stats of the column, so a profile of the shape of the data, so you can see standard deviations and means and maxes, count distincts, and so on. And the goal is that you come to this page and you're able to really quickly figure out if you trust this data or not. And then if you do trust it, then you move on to the next step of your journey, which is actually doing the analysis or writing a Python notebook, or writing a SQL query on top of this data. So that's what the experience is today. This is heavily focused on the first node of the graph, which is tables. That's not the only node we have in the graph. The other node we have in the graph are people. So people like you, Greta, and myself are nodes in that graph. And what happens is if I joined your team, I go to your page and see what tables does Greta own, what does she bookmark, and what is she a frequent user of. So that conversation that I usually have on Slack doesn't need to happen anymore, because I can just have that information presented based on what Greta is doing in her day-to-day life.
Ah, that's great. So how does that work underneath it all then? I know Neo's a big part of that.
Yeah.
You've got a couple other parts of that.
Yeah.
What's your tech stack look like?
Yeah. So there are 4 big components of the architecture for Amundsen. And as I described this, we can think of a search engine like Google to kind of have the analogy alongside.
Okay, yeah, great.
So for Amundsen, the first component is a crawler. We call it data builder. Similar to how Google has these robots that crawl the internet, we do the same thing. So we crawl our databases, our dashboard systems, and our HR systems to get information about which tables were newly created since the last run, which columns were added, who are the new employees who got into the system, who are the ones that left the company, and we need to archive them, so on and so forth. So that's the first piece of the architecture. The second piece of the architecture is a search engine. We based it on top of Elastic, and it powers our search and all the goodness that I was talking to you about, combination of relevance to you based on what search terms and your position in the company, as well as the popularity of the tables is all baked in this search engine service. It's called a search service, unsurprisingly. Then the third component is a front-end service, which hits this search system to get the information. It also hits the fourth component, which is the most interesting one, is the graph database. So that's called the metadata repository, and that has all of our information about tables and people and the linkages between them and the lineages.
Very cool. Okay, so let's dive into that part a little bit. I think that's my favorite part of it. So why graphs? What was it about graph that kind of drew you to it, and what was about, I guess, the data that fits into a graph?
Yeah. So we have, as I was describing, we have multiple different kinds of nodes. The first node we tried to put in our graph was tables, and then we added people. And then there are linkages if you own a table, if you bookmark a table, if you use a table. These are all linkages in this graph. But within the table space too, you would notice that there's lineage across tables, right? I could use one table to create another table. And then across these spaces, I could use a table or a collection of tables to then create a dashboard. And this lineage, we could have represented it in any system, but it just was very obvious that this was a graph relationship, both within a certain type of node as well as across these multiple nodes.
Yeah, very cool. And I think, as you were mentioning, there's been a couple iterations of Amundsen. I think the ability of a graph to kind of to have that flexibility to be able to pull in not only many different data sources, but also to be able to kind of add new nodes, add new types, add new things as you go on. You know, you guys have a lot of, there's a lot more coming, I think.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
So,
we wanted to do it that way too. We added the first kind of node as tables first, and then we said, okay, let's go for the second one, which was people, and then the third one coming as dashboards. And we just see this growing. So the other nodes would be streams and other indexes.
Yeah. Wait. So let's dive a little bit more into that. So what does the future of this look like? What's the next step going to be?
Yeah. So in the journey, I think we're right at the beginning of this journey. We tried to solve this data discovery problem with trust, and we ended up gathering a whole bunch of metadata. So to give you a flavor of the metadata we gather information from our ETL systems, we gather information from our databases, and this is just the metadata around what tables, what schemas, but also around the audit logs. So we hook onto who's accessing what tables and when to power this search interface and all that experience within Amundsen. Then we added people. So now you have linkages, as I was saying, between ownership and bookmarking and so on and so forth. But what we have realized along the way is we have this great metadata around who's using what tables when. We also have data around what data exists in the organization, right? So we can start building other applications on top of this. An example of application in progress is compliance. So as you know, GDPR is top of mind for many of the European folks who work in the data space. CCPA, California's version of GDPR, is rolling in January 1st, 2020. So a lot of us in California are thinking about that. And if I know all the information about where our data is stored, if I can tag all these columns with whether this is personal and private, and then use this information, which I already know who's accessing this data, I can have governance system based on this. And that's the second application that's being built. The third application that's top of mind is around ETL and data quality. So as data is flowing through the system, we have profiles of all the tables, and we can use heuristics based on those profiles to see whether the data that's going in today is meant to be along the lines of what it was yesterday. We can allow for some percentage differences. but is that correct? And we can build heuristics around that. And of course, you can augment these heuristics with some manual tests as well. So the future, as I see, is that we've got a full-fledged metadata repository on which we're building many applications on top of. Discovery and trust is one application, compliance is another application, and then ETL and data quality are a third.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, just because we've had this whole big data revolution. All these companies have enormous amounts of data, and now it's kind of a matter of just being able to locate that data, figure out what's good, what's trustable, and then building some really cool tools on top of that. I know at Neo we've had kind of an explosion recently of just people coming to us wanting to build really cool AI, ML applications on top of a graph, just mostly because they do have all of this very valuable data, and it's just a matter of kind of figuring out where it is, figuring out how to find it, figuring out how to use that data and turn it into a valuable application.
Absolutely. And we are going broad in those applications, but I also want to talk in a little more detail about the depth of each application.
Sure.
So we talk about data discovery, we've got 2 nodes in the graph. The third node, and that being table and people, the third node we're working on adding is dashboards. So initially I was talking about the first category of user, the analyst. The second category of users are the consumers, the decision makers of this data, right? And these people don't necessarily want to write SQL. Actually, they want there to be standard canonicalized dashboards which they make decisions off of and drive the business forward, right? So that's the second category of users who will onboard onto an application when we add that third node of dashboards, right? So all of a sudden you can see from this variety of different dashboards you have, which ones are trustworthy, which ones were last populated, who's the owner for them, who are the frequent viewers, who are the frequent editors, and solve that same problem of data trust in that new space of dashboards. And that's an example of a depth within the same application that we also need to solve for. Within that application, you could also see streams. As we're doing more streaming compute, we need to discover streams and see which streams are trustworthy, find which streams actually map to the data sets, so you know that this stream and this table are actually the same thing, and they're always consistent, so you can use them in the streaming equivalent of this batch application you may have had. So not only are we going broad, we're also going deep in those applications and solving for trust across various different areas.
Yeah, that's great. And I feel like what I love about Neo is kind of the ability to do that and to kind of add on new things to kind of to dive deeper into certain applications. And so I guess let's talk a little bit about, I know you're really interested in data productivity as a space. So let's talk about a little bit kind of what do you see as the future of this space as a whole? Is there kind of, what's coming next for data productivity, and what's kind of, what do you see as next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is lacking this experience. Like, I imagine a world in which you go to your computer as an analyst or a data scientist, and you open this page where you are able to search for information, so kind of like Google, but you're also able to see pushed information to you, relevant to you. So if you own a table or a frequent user of a dashboard and any changes happen, you get notified. So this becomes your hub of information. And you go there, and this is your experience, right? And you are able to search for new things, tag, click, move things around, learn about any changes that are happening. If there's an incident, that information gets pushed to. So instead of you searching around for tribal knowledge, that experience really needs to be catered to you, personalized to you. So a lot of consumer apps, both Google and Facebook, think a lot about that. And I think we in the data space, especially for data productivity of users of data, need to think the same way of creating that application. And then the second part is, as the amount of data is increasing, we need to really think about trust and have an opinion on trust. So no longer can we say like, hey, figure out on your own if this is trustworthy. We actually need to have an opinion of what may be trustworthy for you. And it comes with a caution, right? Like, I can't tell what could be trustworthy for everybody, right? I know for some people this may be trustworthy, but others may have to decipher on their own. And in such cases, I show the underlying markers. But in general, I think tools need to be more opinionated, where you can showcase that here's your experience, here's all the relevant information, this is the page you go every morning to figure out what's going on. And then once you do know an asset, you can figure out if this is trustworthy or not based on some markers or recommendations that this tool gives us.
Yeah, especially for companies like Lyft that are growing so quickly as new teams are spinning up everywhere, new types of data is coming in from every application, and there's new things I feel like every single day. And even large organizations, large enterprises that have siloed teams from everywhere, and there are a lot of different data sources. I think being able to, that trustworthiness, I agree, that's I think a big issue for all enterprises as well. So I guess what's kind of been the adoption for Amundsen? I know you had this interesting stat that it used to take data analysts so much time just to even find the data and to figure out if it's kind of the trustworthy data that they want to have. What's been the adoption? What's kind of happened since Amundsen's been released?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I measure adoption at Lyft, and we measure adoption, is few metrics. The first one is how many users come every week to use this tool. Then the second one is a CSAT score to see how well people love this tool. And third one, which is maybe a derived metric, is how much improvement in productivity have we seen based on this tool. So we currently have about just over 200 scientists in the company, and the weekly active users of Amundsen are actually more than twice that.
Wow.
So you've got these scientists whose day job is working with data and being that analyst profile, but we have more people who are coming to this tool and loving it. And these people are coming from various different domains in the company. So an operations analyst or a customer service analyst are finding data, asking others about how to find data, and reaching out to the tool and coming to this tool every week. So adoption has been superb, and we've seen that growth very organically within the company. The CSATs also represent this. It's over 8.5 out of 10, and people are just coming up and saying it's a great tool. That doesn't mean we don't have a lot more. We can hang our shoes. We've got a lot more work, but the initial uptake has been amazing. In terms of productivity, that one is a harder to manage metric and also to instrument. So based on qualitative research that we have done, we've found that data scientists and research scientists, which are more of the modeling folks, are over a third of their time, 33% more productive. Wow. Just because they have to spend less time on discovery. I also want to share some numbers around open source. So as you know,
Sure.
We've recently open sourced this. And one thing we feel very strongly about is elevating the rest of the data community with us. We have gotten and learned a lot from them, and we want to share back to the community. And so we've open sourced this. We have over 10 companies contribute to Amundsen. So these are PRs and code that has been changed and filed. ING has been the first company to deploy Amundsen in production after Lyft. And they've been using it for the same data discovery and trust. And there are many others who are contributing integration with other databases like BigQuery and Postgres and Redshift, and building systems that integrate really well, like WeWork's Marquez system. So the open source adoption has been really pleasantly surprising as well.
That's awesome. And final point, are there any resources that people can go to kind of learn more about?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a blog post which shares in a little more detail with screenshots about what Amundsen looks like and what problem it's trying to solve. If you Google search for Amundsen Lyft metadata, you could find that blog post. We'll also post a link underneath this webcast.
Yeah.
There's also an open source repository which has a link to a Slack channel if you want to get involved in the community, if you want to try it out. You're welcome to do that, and a bunch of documentation on that as well.
Great, awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us on this live stream. As Mark said, we will point out, we'll send links to not only this recording, but also to Mark's blog post. And there's a couple other kind of cool talks that he's given and his team has given about Amundsen. Thank you all for coming. I do want to point out we have a webinar tomorrow morning. It's going to be a little bit early for you West Coasters, but anyone else, our chief scientist, Jim Weber, is going to be talking about graphs in AI and kind of what the future of AI is looking like. So check out neo4j.com/events, and you'll be able to find that webinar. And as I said, we will be sending out this recording along with a couple other links as soon as it's ready. So thank you all for joining. And Mark, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.